All right. Good morning, everyone. We're going to learn Parshas Pinchas this morning. I just want to give a special welcome to my mother, who is joining us today, all the way from Israel. It's good to see you. All right, so we are studying Parshas Pinchas, again, 876 in the Art Scroll. If you are using the Steinsaltz Chumash, it is page 883. And this Parsha, obviously it begins in a very dramatic way. I want to say it begins in a violent way, but that's not really true. The violence is at the end of last week's Parsha, Pinchas's zealous act, assassinating Zimri and Cosby in front of everyone. That violent act takes place at the end of last week's Parsha, and then the story is interrupted, and the aftermath is in this week's Parsha. So it begins in that tone of violence and zealous rage for Hashem. But if you look at all of the different elements of the Parsha, and it seems to be a disparate group of topics, you'll find that there is a theme. There is an overriding theme to this Parsha, one which I've discussed to some degree in the past, but this year it's grabbing me much more than in the past. Now, we're not going to read through the whole Parsha, obviously, but the topics that we have in our Parsha are as follows, and I think they're all linked by the same theme. So it begins with the aftermath of Pinchas's act of zealous spiritual rage, and the blessing that Hashem gives him for that. So we'll just call the first topic Pinchas. Next, we are told Hashem tells Moshe to take vengeance from the Midyanim, who caused the Jewish people to sin, specifically the Midyanim, but not the Moavim, which is a little bit surprising, and we'll talk about that. Then after the war waged against the Midyanim, then we have the census, the second census of Sefer Bamidbar. As we mentioned in our class on the book of Bamidbar, we noted that Bamidbar basically begins and ends with censuses of the people, and that is why it is called Chumash HaPekudim by the rabbis, the book of Numbers as it's translated in English. It's Bamidbar in the desert, but we call it Numbers because it's Chumash HaPekudim. We talked about that all the way back at Parshas Bamidbar, but the census takes up a great deal of material in this Parsha. Following the census is the division of the land, or how the land will be divided. Followed by that, part of that story of the division of the land is the story of the daughters of Tzalafchad. Following the story of the daughters of Tzalafchad, Moshe is told to transfer leadership to Yehoshua. And then our Parsha concludes with the Korbanos, specifically the Korbanos Musaf that are brought on holidays, on Shabbos and Rosh Chodesh, and that's how the Parsha ends off. Now that seems to be a pretty wide variety of topics for one Parsha. We have Pinchas, we have war, we have census, we have division of land, and we have Korbanos. And there doesn't seem to be an obvious link, and it doesn't necessarily need a link, but of course, we like to find coherency in the text because we find more meaning in the text when we find coherency between the different parts. We're following the tradition of the rabbis. The rabbis ask all the time, Lama nismecha parsha this to parsha that, because things being juxtaposed is not incidental. It's they are there for a reason. And I don't think it's too much of a stretch. I don't think we're imposing too much on the text to say that the common bond, the link between all of these disparate topics is the concept of family, mishpacha, family. And I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to start in the middle because this census, right, which is not the first topic of the Parsha, but the census which takes up the lion's share of our Parsha, that census centers on families, counting families. And the word mishpacha or beis avosam is used over and over again. The Jewish people are counted by families. But let's back up because the first topic, the topic of Pinchas, is one that's obviously it has its own complexity and its own difficulty to understand, why Pinchas was justified in doing what he was doing. But at the end of the day, when you look at how that tragedy develops, you'll see that there is a distinct family component to it. If you look back at Parshas Balak, at the last aliyah of Parshas Balak, you would be on page 874 in the Art Scroll and 881 in the Steinsaltz. It's Perek Chaf Hey Pasuk Aleph 25:1. Vayishav Yishol Bashitim Vayachel Ha'am Liznos El Benos Moab. How does this tragedy unfold? It unfolds by Jewish men betraying their wives, betraying their families. And because they betrayed their families, they then betrayed Hashem, right? Because the men were seduced by the daughters of Moab, they then enticed them to worship Avodah Zarah. Vayitzamed Yisrael leval Pa'or. Vayitzamed is such a strong word that the Jewish people became cleaved or clinged to Baal Pa'or. They didn't just worship; they were attached to it, which invokes Hashem's rage, and then you have this act, this terribly defiling act of a man taking a woman in front of everybody, a leader of the Jewish people, which is just such a stark demonstration of the violation of the bonds of family. Zimri didn't take an idol of Baal Peor and worship it in front of everybody. He took a woman and lay with her in front of everybody. And to me, what this shows is that there's a certain connection or dynamic between the violation of family and violating the relationship with Hashem. That this whole thing began with a betrayal of their wives and their families to go off with these other foreign women. And because they did that, they ended up betraying Hashem as well. So they betrayed family and Hashem all at the same time. And the climactic moment of this tragedy was a moment not of Avodah Zarah, but of family betrayal. Right? It was a physical relationship, but an inappropriate one. And that's what Pinchas responds to. And Pinchas's response embodies Hashem's attitude, Hashem's view towards this whole tragic scene. Because when we go into our Parsha, what does Hashem say? B'kanoes kinasi, right? When Pinchas, 876 in the Art Scroll, 883 in the Steinsaltz, when Pinchas commits the act of religious assassination that he does, which brings about a stop to the plague that Hashem had sent against the Jewish people, Hashem describes it as b'kanoes kinasi, right? That he took up my zealous or jealous rage, right? The word kano is also kina, jealousy, and what that b'kanoes kinasi, what that teaches us, what that indicates, is that Hashem felt a certain jealousy that was demonstrated by Pinchas. But that jealousy, that kina, b'kanoes kinasi, actually reflects one of the essential features of Hashem and our relationship to him. Because all the way back in the Aseret Hadibros, Hashem describes himself as a kel kana. Hashem is a jealous God. What does it mean for Hashem to be a jealous God? Hashem is a God that demands monogamy. Hashem is a God that demands that we worship him and him only. What it means to be a Jew isn't just to follow the first of the Aseret Hadibros, to believe in Hashem, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, but it's the second Dibur also. Lo yihi elecha Elohim acherim. You're not supposed to have other gods. We are supposed to be in an exclusive relationship with Hashem. And that exclusivity was violated by those people who first violated their families. They betrayed their families, and that brought them to betray the exclusive relationship that they're supposed to have with Hashem. Hashem is a jealous God. Hashem is a kel kana. Hashem is a God that demands that we worship Him and Him alone. And when we violated that, and Pinchas responds to it, Pinchas is identified, is described as bikano es kinasi. So you see this mixture, as it were, between the family relationship and our relationship with Hashem. That there's a certain devotion that is required of us to Hashem that is similar, that is parallel to the unconditional devotion that we have towards family. And so that is how I believe the Parsha begins first, begins first with this concept of family. And then when it moves into the next topic, the topic of taking vengeance upon the Midyanim, there's a very interesting contrast here, because the Jewish people began their betrayal with the daughters of Moab. And yet Moab is not going to be the target of this battle. It's going to be Midyan. So Chazal have to kind of fill in the details for us that yes, it began with Moab, and then Midyan joined in order to undermine the spiritual integrity of the Jewish people. But because of who the Midyanim are and who the Moavim are, we are meant to, Hashem commands us to wipe out the Midyanim and not the Moavim. And part of this, and this is certainly, I wouldn't necessarily call this pshat, but it's definitely right underneath the surface, is the fact that Moab has a familial bond with the Jewish people. Moab, as descendants of the daughters of Lot, who will one day give birth to very important members of the Jewish people. There's a familial bond. There's a familial connection to Moab that does not exist with Midyan. And then we move into the census. And when it comes to the census, you see very clearly the focus of this census. We talked in Parshas Bamidbar, when we had the first census, all the way at the beginning of the 40 years in the desert. Technically, it was the second year, but it was at the beginning of the 40-year experience. We talked about the different possible reasons for that census, but we noted in the language of the psukim that there was a heavy focus in that first census on the building of an army, of a military. It's kol yotzei tzava, right? Who was being counted? Men 20 years and older who are yotzei tzava, who can be part of an armed force. And according to some, the whole idea was to prepare to take possession of the land of Israel and the battles that would be involved in accomplishing that. Now, it also says yotzei tzava here. It also refers in this second census to yotzei tzava, but the emphasis is different. Because in the first census, it doesn't just say yotzei tzava, it also says tifkedu osam litzivosam, according to their troops, according to their hosts. It says very specifically at that first census that they are to be counted litzivosam, right, in order to, for the purpose of creating these troops, these hosts, as we find in the translation. But here, yotzei tzava gives way very quickly to a different word that is used over and over again, and that is mishpacha, or mishpachas. So if you're looking in Perek Vav, Pasuk Hey, page 885 in the Art Scroll, 878 in the 885 in the Steinsaltz, 878 in the Art Scroll, right? So it says very clearly in Pasuk Hey, Ruvain B'chor Yisrael B'nei Ruvain Chanoch Mishpachas HaChanochi Lefalo Mishpachas HaPalui Lechatzro Mishpachas HaChatzroni, right? It's all about excuse me. It's all about these mishpachos, these families. But not only that, but if you look back at the first census, which we're not going to do, we're not going to look inside. The phrase kol yotzei tzava is repeated many times, whereas here here when it states the numbers, when it states the 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 how this, the results of the census, it says specifically leves avosam, right? That the commandment is to count the people leves avosam according to their ancestral home, which again carries the same topic. It carries the same theme as mishpacha. Beis avosam in my mind, is very similar to mishpacha. So that is another element in the census that I think emphasizes the concept of family. And finally, in the first census, it says specifically that it's b'mispar shemos legulgulosam, right? The number of names according to their heads, which gives the first census the sense that it's really focused on counting individuals. Individuals certainly according to their tribes, but individuals in contrast to this second census where it doesn't mention anything about individuals. Obviously, it's counting individuals. I get that. It says but the first census goes very far in emphasizing that it's each individual head. You don't have that in this census. There isn't an emphasis on each individual person. Again, the emphasis is on the families. Now, in context, this makes a lot of sense, and that is because right now, at the end of the 40 years in the desert, what appears next after the census is la'ela techalek es haaretz, right? To these people will you divide up the land. So it makes sense that they would be counted according to their tribal affiliations, their ancestral homes, but not necessarily, because one could expect that the census of the people would simply just go by tribe, right? We don't necessarily need to emphasize mishpachos, families. If we're dividing up the land and the land is divided up by tribes, we could keep the focus on the tribes and not necessarily the individual families within the tribes. And by the way, there is a machlokas rishonim whether the land was divided up simply by tribes or also by ancestral homes, meaning the relative size of any particular allotment. Did it go by the size of the tribe? And so a tribe of a certain size got a land of a certain size, and then it was up to them to divide up amongst the families? Or was the original division of the land of Israel actually done not just by tribes, but also by families? Bigger families got bigger pieces of land, smaller families got smaller pieces of land. That's a machlokas rishonim on la'ela techalek es haaretz, whether it went by tribes, whether it went by families. But for our purposes, what I'd like to emphasize, though, is that when it comes to dividing up the land, it's clear that there is an emphasis on dividing it up by family. I see that also by what happens next. And that is the episode of the daughters of Tzalafchad, who say that they are going to lose out. Now, I saw an article by Rabbi Ben Nun who makes a fascinating observation. He says that, if you want to read the story of the daughters of Tzalafchad from a feminist perspective and see how women were made sure to stake their claim that they should not lose out in the settling of the land of Israel, he says you can do that, but more pshat is the fact that they were concerned for their father's name, right? Their primary concern, it was making sure they would get land, but even if they didn't get land through their father, they would get land through whoever their husband was. Their primary concern was their father's name, and that's their family name. And so what you see from this is that in coming on the heels of the commandment to divide up the land, here was a family, here was a set of children, of daughters, who wanted to make sure that their family was represented, that they wouldn't just be absorbed into a different family, that they would retain their family identity. So you can definitely look at the story of the daughters of Tzalafchad and see how women were able to stake their claim. what the story is really about is their family identity and wanting to retain their family identity. And when you get that counter, not protest, but when later on, when they say, oh, wait a second, okay, these daughters of Selachad, fine, they'll inherit their father, but then they're going to get married, and their land that land from our tribe will then go to another tribe, and they made sure that they married people within their own tribe. That just shows you again that it wasn't just about them staking their claim, but really about protecting their family identity. Okay, so after the daughters of Selachad, then you have the story of how Hashem commands Moshe to inaugurate Yehoshua into leadership. And I think there's something. I think the idea of family, mishpacha, as it plays out in this story, is much more subtle. But I think the whole notion of laying one's hand on another person, which we find first with Yaakov putting his hands on Ephraim and Menashe, I think there's a real family bond that's expressed in the laying of the hands on someone, and that even though Yehoshua is not related to Moshe, and Yehoshua is certainly not his son, and Moshe's sons are absent, as it were, from the history of our people. Nevertheless, I think there is something parental going on here, where Moshe is bestowing some of his inspiration and pouring it into Yehoshua. I think that it's certainly more of a subtle point, but I think the whole notion of him laying his hands on him like that, I think is definitely indicates some element of that as well. Now, the Korbanos Musaf, Rabbi Yoel Ben Nun has a fascinating article on the Korbanos Musaf, trying to understand what are these Korbanos doing here, right? A vast majority of Mishkan-related halachos and mitzvos are all in Sefer Vayikra, right? Sefer Vayikra the Mishkan is built in the end of Sefer Shmos. And then in Sefer Vayikra is all the korbanos and how to operate the Mishkan. The korbanos musaf belong there. Or in Parshas Emor, where we have the list of the cycles of the festivals, right, the holidays, right, Ele Moadei Hashem, right. So why not put the korbanos musaf in that list of holidays? Why is it stuck in here at the end of Sefer Bamidbar? It's such a random spot for the Korbanos Musaf of the cycles of festivals. And so Rabbi Yoel Ben Nun makes a brilliant series of observations which demonstrate very clearly a really compelling approach as to why these Korbanos end up here. And the first thing he notes is that it seems like the major difference between, just on technical grounds, the major difference between the cycle of festivals in Parshas Emor and the cycle of holidays found in Parshas Pinchas here is Rosh Chodesh. Right? Rosh Chodesh is mentioned here, and Rosh Chodesh is not mentioned in Parshas Emor, in the cycle of festivals. Now, what's going on in Emor versus Pinchas? So, as I said, here in Pinchas, it's what it's focusing on in terms of the holidays is these korbanos musaf. What are these korbanos musaf? So we have regular daily offerings, right? The korban tamid that's brought in the morning and the afternoon in the Beis Hamikdash, and then on special days there is a musaf, an additional korban. So it's this additional korbans that are special for particular days, namely Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh, and holidays. So they all have a korban musaf. That's why we daven musaf on those days, right? Because it corresponds to the korban musaf. That's what it centers on here in Pinchas. Back in Parshas Emor, it does not talk about the korbanos musaf. The central focus of the holidays back in Parshas Emor is the fact that they are mikra a kodesh. that they are days that have a status of holiness. And that status of holiness means we don't do malacha, right? That it is forbidden to do labor because a day is set aside as a day of holiness, whether it's Shabbos or whether it's the festivals. We don't do malacha because it is a mikra kodesh. Each one is identified. Each day is defined as a mikra kodesh. And so it makes sense then why Rosh Chodesh does not appear in the Emor cycle and why it does appear here in the Pinchas cycle. Because Rosh Chodesh has a Korban Musaf, but it is not a Mikra Kodesh. It is not forbidden to do malacha on Rosh Chodesh. So this is the observation that Rabbi Yoel Ben Nun makes, that the reason why Rosh Chodesh appears here in our Parsha, but not in Emor, is because it has a Korban Musaf, but is not a Mikra Kodesh, not forbidden in malacha. And based on that, what Rabbi Yoel Ben Nun argues is that the nature, the essence of the Korban Musaf, and we see this already in the Mishnah, is that the Korban Musaf has a much more communal aspect to it. There's a halacha in the Mishnah that says, "Ein tfilas hamusafim ela bechever ir." That tfilas musaf, fundamentally, you can daven musaf on your own, but fundamentally, tfilas musaf, the davening of musaf, is something that is supposed to be done communally. And so Musaf represents the gathering of the community. Now, what that means here in the context of the Torah is that these festivals are times for people to get together. Specifically, the Shalosh Regalim, which are pilgrimage festivals, where everyone's supposed to not just get together, but get together with Hashem and be in the Beis HaMikdash. But one of the aspects of the festivals, including Shabbos, including Rosh Chodesh, it is a time to mark together with family and with friends. And so that's how the Musaf Korbanos that are listed in this Parsha also have this concept of mishpacha, of family, because the Korbanos Musaf represents that aspect of the holiday in which we are supposed to get together, be together with family, which clearly resonates with us nowadays when many of us are either cooped up with family or separated from family, right? Musaf is a reminder of how much we derive, how much spiritual strength we derive from being able to celebrate together with family, to observe festivals and Shabbos and Rosh Chodesh with family. So at this point, what I've tried to demonstrate is that the theme of family, of mishpacha, can be found throughout this parsha. I think some of these topics carry it better than others, I admit, but certainly the whole concept of betrayal of family bound up in the betrayal of Hashem with Pinchas, that stands out. The census, which is done according to families specifically, this time around, reflects this concept of family. The division of land and the Benos Tzalafchad maintaining their family identity, and the Korbanos Musaf, which represent the concept of getting together with family on special days. That's what the Korban Musaf represents. I think you see pretty clearly the theme of family in this parsha. So what? What does this teach us? Okay, so the theme of family. Yes, family is important in Judaism. We all get that. But why is it so important to identify the theme of family here in our parsha? So for that, I have to thank again Rabbi Yoel Ben Nun in his article, who pointed out an observation that I don't think I've heard before, and I was quite taken, quite startled when I read it. And that is how many families are counted in the census. If you go through this census, which is a little boring and repetitive, but if you go through the entire chapter 26, Parashas, and I haven't done this, so don't test me on it. I'm taking Rabbi Yoel Ben Nun's word for it. But if you count up all the families, how many families do you get? 70. 70 families in this census. Why does that knock my socks off? Because it says specifically in the beginning of Shemos, in the end of Sefer Bereshis, in the beginning of Shemos, that the Jewish people came down to Mitzrayim as 70 people. B'shivim nefesh yordu avoseinu. Right? We came down as 70, as a family of 70, and now we're coming back up. We're coming back up to the land of Canaan as a nation built on 70 families. And so that whole concept of coming down in 70, coming up from 70 is meant to convey a sense of divine orderliness. These are bookends. This shows you that this is Hashem's plan. This is the covenant, and you see the covenant being realized when it begins and ends with this very same number, right? Shivim nefesh, right? We came down as 70, and the Torah emphasizes both in Bereshis, when Yaakov comes down with his family, it emphasizes the number 70, and when Shmos opens up as a book in Perek Aleph and Shmos, it emphasizes again that there were 70 people. And so to see that this census, preparing for the division of the land, is a census grounded in 70 families, I think reflects this very beautifully. But there's more to it. Do me a favor, turn to Shmos Perek Aleph. Turn to the very beginning of Shmos. I want to show you a couple of things here when it comes to the concept of family. So I'm turning here. In my Steinsaltz Chumash, I am on page 287. And in the Art Scroll, we are on page 2 something. 292 in the Art Scroll, 287 in the Steinsaltz. Ve'ela Shmos b'nei Yisrael, habi Mitzrayma, Es Yaakov Yishuv Esov va'u, Ruvain, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, yada, yada, yada. Vayehi kol nefesh yotze Yerech Yaakov, shivim nefesh. Right? 70. V'Yosef hayav Mitzrayim. Yosef was in Mitzrayim, so Yosef and his sons weren't counted in the 70. And it's interesting how the last census on 70 families does include, Yosef. But what's so fascinating to me is, again, that first pasuk, and I've spoken about this many times, Ve'ela shmos b'nei Yisrael v'Mitzrayma, Es Yaakov, Yishuv Esovo. Right? With Yaakov, each man and his household. Right? The pasuk is emphasizing that the Jewish people, that the children of Yaakov came down not just as individuals, but they came down as households. They came down as families. And why is that important? Because the fact that the Bnei Yisrael are comprised of household is emphasized on a number of occasions. Further, we're not going to switch. We're not going to turn the pages so much, but if we go from Shmos Perek Aleph to Shmos Perek Yud Beis, HaChodesh Zelachem Rosh Chodashim Rishon Hu L'Chodshei HaShana, when the Jewish people are given their first mitzvah as a collective, as a group, so what are they told to do? They're supposed to take a sad, they're supposed to take a sheep and bring it in for the Korban Pesach. How is the Korban Pesach supposed to be done? Ish se leves avos se labayis. That the first mitzvah that is given to the Jewish people, well, the second mitzvah, right? The first one's Rosh Chodesh, and then you get Korban Pesach. But this mitzvah, the Korban Pesach, which is really a korban that represents our identity of who we are as a people, is a mitzvah that is placed upon not individuals but on households. Right? The Korban Pesach was supposed to be eaten in the house. You're not supposed to leave the house. You're not supposed to take part of the Korban Pesach out of the house. Everything has to remain in the house on that fateful night that Hashem would pass over the homes of Bnei Yisrael. Everything focuses around the house at that night in which the Bnei Yisrael were forged into a nation. They were formed into a nation while they were in their households, while they were in their homes. So they came down to Mitzrayim, Ishu Vesovo, they came down as households. They were made into a nation on Pesach night as households. And not only that, but when you get to Matan Torah, right, it sounds like a nice piece of poetry, but what does Hashem say to Moshe? Hashem says, Ko somar leves Yaakov v'saged li b'nei Yisrael. This is what you shall say to the house of Jacob, to Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel. So, I mean, it's nice poetically to refer to the Jewish people as both Beis Yaakov and Bnei Yisrael, but obviously there's some meaning to it, and that is because the identity of the Jewish people is grounded on the notion of households, of families. That's how they came down to Egypt. That's how they were given the mitzvah on the Pesach night, and that's how they were referred to at Matan Torah when they're referred to as a Beis Yaakov. Now, why? And what's also interesting, if you think about it, is when you look at the Mishkan and the way Hashem constructs the Mishkan, it very much models a home, right? There's an inner sanctum, there's a private bedroom, there is a shulchan, there is a menorah, there is a mizbeach, there is light, there is food, there's a table which we eat together. There's also a kior because you have to wash up, right? You have to wash behind your ears, you have to brush your teeth, right? It has all the elements of a household because that's where Hashem dwells, and we are dwelling with Hashem. So the concept of mishpacha, of family, of household, carries through the entire story of Bnei Yisrael. But where does it come from? It comes from something even earlier. And that is that when Hashem created the world, so Hashem wanted to manifest himself amongst his people, right? Hashem, his creations. But his creations, his people, they deteriorated into avodah zarah, into idol worship. And they stopped believing in him. And the world became corrupt. You had the flood. You had Migdal Bavel. You had many, many of his creations that began to worship all sorts of natural phenomena and so on and so forth. Who was it that recognized Hashem? It was a family. It was Avram and Sarah. Hashem promised to make them into a family, and that family would become a nation. The beginnings of the Jewish people are the fact that they are built out of a family, right? Avram and Sarah, Yitzchak and Rivka, Yaakov, Rachel, and Leah. These are the families that were then made into a nation. So this emphasis on the concept of family, that the Jewish people came down as families to Egypt and now are being brought back up as families, is there to ensure that we recognize, that we remember that our core identity of who we are as a people is the fact that we began as a family that believed in Hashem, and that family was made into a nation. Now, this concept of family, I think, is not incidental. Okay, so what? So we're a nation that began as a family. Who cares? So I mean, it's nice, it certainly reflects some of our values, but fundamentally, what's this all about? So I remember learning a long time ago that the reason why Bnei Yisrael, the Jewish people, are built out of a family actually comes back to what Pinchas demonstrated in his zealous act of rage. And that is that our love and bond with Hashem should be that of that very same instinctive, unconditional bond that we feel for our family. That what Hashem is teaching us by creating us out of a family is that the only analog in this world that we can find for the love of Hashem, the only example we can find for that concept of unconditional devotion to Hashem is found in our family. And that to the extent that we are able to feel into the concept of family that we have and include Hashem in that, then we are capturing exactly what Hashem had intended. The reason why Hashem made us out of a family into a nation is so that we should always remember that those bonds of family are the kinds of bonds we should feel to Hashem. And then when you get to ideas in the Gemara, they kind of make sense now. Like, there are three people involved in the creation of a person, right? The mother, the father, and Hashem. That Gemara doesn't just teach us that a person is created both physically and spiritually by his parents and the Ribono Shel Olam, but I think it also represents this concept that the kind of bond we feel for family, that's the template of the bond, the sense of commitment that we feel towards Hashem. So when we come back to our Parsha, Parshas Pinchas, if you just turn back, I believe it was 883, I believe, in the Steinsaltz. Yeah, 883 in the Steinsaltz. In the Art Scroll, it is 876. So So Pinchas has turned back my anger from Bnei Israel. Right, that he was zealous on my behalf, or jealous. Shalom. Right, now I'm going to give him a covenant of peace. And this whole idea of a covenant of peace, obviously, from the early commentaries on down, it strikes us a little bit ironic that here he committed this terribly violent act of zealous rage, and he's given a covenant of peace. So maybe that covenant of peace is corrective, it's supposed to balance or something. To me, it makes sense now that he's given it a covenant of peace is because Pinchas restored shalom, right? Pinchas restored the relationship between Hashem and the Jewish people. If the Jewish people betrayed their families and then betrayed Hashem, what Pinchas was able to do in a terribly violent act was to be able to restore relationships. And we see how critical it is to Jewish identity that we have this sense of relationships, right? That we have our family, we have our relationship with Hashem, who has, and we should, the bond that we feel with family, we should feel for Hashem. The fact that Pinchas restored that, of course, it makes sense to give him a bris shalom, a covenant of peace, because he restored shalom, right? There's that concept, shalom bayis, right? Shalom bayis, which represents the concept of the peace of the home, family peace, a family feeling whole and connected. That's exactly what Pinchas accomplishes on both levels by bringing an end to the calamity of that terrible corruption in which people betrayed their families, and bringing an end to their betrayal of Hashem. So he gets shalom, and not only that, he gets to work in the house. Right? The fact that he has the covenant of the kahuna forever, whatever that means. He's already a child of Aaron. That should make him a kohen anyway. But the fact that it's continued through Pinchas, it means that Pinchas is the custodian of the divine home. The divine home where Hashem dwells and we dwell with Hashem, again, as a family, feeling those bonds of family. So I think this theme of mishpacha carries through very beautifully, and it's not just incidental. It goes to our core identity of who we are. We're a nation who is built as family, and when you think about what it means to be a Jewish person, so Jewish identity is transmitted, in two ways. Either a person is born into it, which clearly reflects this idea of family, of mishpacha, that to be a member of the Jewish people means to be part of a family. You're born into it. But even someone who comes through the other way, right? Someone who converts obtains that family concept through their conversion, right? A person who converts cannot undo their conversion. Right, their Jewish identity becomes unconditional. Even if they decide they want to, they want to check out, they can't. From a halachic perspective, Jewish identity is familial. Jewish national identity is familial, so that you can join the family. Once you join the family, you are part of the family, whether you like it or not. Just like someone born into a family, right? We don't get to choose our parents. We don't get to choose our siblings. Same thing with a convert who chooses to become part of the Jewish people. They can no longer choose not to. They can no longer opt out, which to me, again, reflects this concept of the mishpacha nature of Jewish identity. All right, thank you all so much for joining me today. Have a great week. It's good to see you. It is
Thank
possible
you.
that we may start doing things indoors. We will still continue on Zoom no matter what, but I'll keep everyone posted on when and if we do that. All right, take care, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi. Oh, thank you.
Welcome. Take care.
Thank you.